Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am Gebo the Shaman, and today we're talking about reading the book Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward, the Monotheist Subversion of Traditional Religious Thought by Michael William Denney. And so yeah, that is my teacher, that is my mentor. So we're reading his books, and so if you want to check out any of my services, anything that I have to offer, then you can go to gebotheshaman.com, right here, gebotheshaman.com. And I have my Tantric Secrets of Vedic Astrology book right there. You can check that out. I also have a bunch of courses, services, things like that. So I have my, Qigong courses, I have my astrology stuff, astrology readings, all kinds of stuff. So Qigong courses, career coaching, life coaching, all kinds of stuff. So check that out at gebotheshaman.com. Alright, so let's jump into it. So last time we left off with the chapter origins of modern modern monotheism. Alright, so we're going to be taking it from there. So starting with origins of modern monotheism. Alright, let's get into it. So origins of modern monotheism. There we go. Alright. Monotheism as we know it today is sorry. Monotheism as we know it today officially began in 597 BCE when the nation of Judea replaced their traditional polytheist religion with a monotheist nationalist religion. Ironically, when first introduced to the nation of Judea, Jewish monotheism was a little known and peculiar religion that was very unique and in the ancient world. Despite what we have been taught in schools, temples, mosques, and churches, monotheism was not the first religion practiced by humans. It is a complete aberration in human religious history and is a very recent invention. Alright. And despite the Old Testament stories to the contrary, the Hebrew tribes before 597 BCE were actually polytheists, not unlike every other polytheist culture in the world at that time. It was only after the Babylonian conquest in 597 BCE and subsequent captivity of the Jewish elite that we see the creation of a monotheist Jewish religion in the historical and archaeological record. Babylonian exile. The Jewish Bible, Christian Old Testament, the Torah was written during the Jewish Babylonian exile, which began in 597 BCE. There is no scholarly dispute here. It is well known that the Jewish scriptures were written down at this time and brought back to Judea with the return of the Jewish captives after the fall of Babylon to the Persian king Cyrus the Great in 538 BCE. According to Christian and Jewish religious mythology, the Hebrew people had a very long, ancient history with monotheism stretching all the way back to Abraham, who is called by the one true God, Jehovah, to return to one true religion. The same biblical historical version goes on to tell the story of the enslavement of the Hebrew tribes in Egypt and the deliverance of the Hebrews from bondage at the hand of the one true God, Jehovah, and the return of the children of Israel into the land of Canaan, where they liberated the Holy Land from the pagan Canaanites and founded the monotheist nation of Israel. The Old Testament spends a lot of time chronicling the conquest of the idolatrous, polytheist Canaanites, and characterizing them as a foreign people, the children of Israel. This is the history we have all come to believe about the Jewish religion and monotheism. However, the archaeological and historical record tell a very different story about the origins of the Hebrew tribes. According to the disciplines of linguistics, history, and archaeology, the Israelites are none other than the Canaanites themselves. The Canaanites were a Semitic people living in the land known as Palestine, who spoke and wrote a Semitic language that evolved into the language known today as Hebrew. Archaeology has conclusively proven that the Hebrew language is a direct descendant of the Canaanite language. Existing writing from the Canaanite period has been conclusively determined to be an early form of Hebrew. Even the Old Testament does not dispute this fact. In Isaiah 19:18, the Hebrew language is referred to as the language of Canaan. This scientific fact surrounding the history, the ancestry of the Hebrew tribes, is in direct opposition to the Bible, to the biblical account of the founding of Israel. According to the Old Testament, after Abraham settled in Canaan, his descendants migrated into Egypt, where they were subsequently taken into slavery, where they suffered under the lash of Egyptian pharaohs, were forced to build pyramids, etc., until they were liberated by God through the miraculous hands of Moses. We are led to believe that after their liberation from the Egyptians, the children of Israel wandered the desert of the Sinai Peninsula for 40 years, being tested by Jehovah until entering the promised land and conquering the pagan, idolatrous Canaanite foreigners, and thereafter founding the kingdom of Israel, where the land of Canaan used to be. However, according to objective scientific data, there was never any conquest of Canaan. by invading Hebrew refugees from Egypt. There is also no archaeological evidence whatsoever of the wandering Israelites in the deserts of Egypt. According to the Bible, approximately 2.5 million Israelite men, women, and children wandered the Sinai Desert for 40 years before then being led into the promised land of Canaan by Joshua. And yet there is absolutely no archaeological evidence of this biblical account of events. No evidence at all. According to archaeologists, it is literally quite impossible for 2.5 million people to have wandered through this area for 40 years without leaving any physical trace of their existence. Furthermore, there is no historical or written evidence of there having been Israelite slaves living in Egypt as described in the biblical account. It is extremely unlikely that the biblical account of the enslavement of the entire nation of the 12 tribes of Israel could have occurred without any written or archaeological evidence of their existence. Let's see. The fact that in fact, the only evidence of this entire version of Hebrew history is found only in the Jewish Old Testament, which wasn't written down until during the Babylonian captivity of the Jewish elite in 597 BCE. Polytheist Hebrews. According to archaeological data uncovered in Israel, it is very clear that not only were the Hebrews directly descended from the polytheist Canaanites, but that prior to Babylonian captivity, the Jews were also devout polytheists, just like every other culture in the area at the time. Archaeological artifacts dating back to historical periods in the Old Testament, where the Israelites were supposedly worshiping the one true God, indicate that the Jews of this period were supposedly worshiping the one true God. Indicate that the Jews of this period worshipped many gods. Excavations of houses all over Judea during this time period revealed household altars dedicated to multiple gods, containing idols and statues of various kinds. According to the archaeological record, the practice of polytheist worship in Judea comes to an abrupt halt at the time of the Babylonian exile, where the Jewish elite were taken into captivity and the Jewish temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. At the end of the exile period, there is a drastic change in the archaeological record, where all of the polytheist altars and idols disappear. This indicates that the Jewish people make a sudden transition from polytheism to monotheism right after the return of the Jewish exiled elite from Babylon. So, what happened? Why the sudden change from polytheism to monotheism? Jehovah, the protector of Judea. Jehovah was worshipped during the polytheist period, but it wasn't until after the return of the Jewish priesthood from Babylon that Jehovah was installed as the one true God of the Jewish people, to the exclusion of all other gods. Before the exile period, the Temple in Jerusalem had an altar of fire to Jehovah, who was believed to protect the Jewish state from foreign invasion. As was the custom with many temples all over the world dedicated to various gods, Jehovah's flame in the temple was to be kept lit at all times. It was believed that as long as his flame was lit and regular sacrifices were given to him, that Jehovah would protect the borders of Judea from all invaders. Well, when the Babylonians attacked and defeated the Jews, they sacked the temple of Jehovah. The sacred flame was put out and the temple was destroyed. The symbolism here is obvious. By destroying the temple of Jehovah and putting out the sacred flame, not only was the nation of Judea defeated, but so was the God assigned to protect them. It is believed by many scholars that what happened next during the exile in Babylon is what set the stage for the introduction of monotheism as we know it today. The Babylonians did not take the entire nation of Judea captive, only the ruling elite. This would have included the priestly class, so the Jewish priests had a problem. They had kept the sacred flame of Jehovah lit at all times as Jehovah had instructed them to do. They had also performed regular sacrifices to him, so why did Jehovah abandon the Jews, allowing them to be conquered and captured by the Babylonians? The Jewish priests most likely reasoned that they must have offended Jehovah in some way, but how? They must have asked, what made Jehovah so angry that he abandoned his people? Light bulb moment. Jehovah must be a jealous God. He must have wanted exclusive devotion to himself only. He must have. We must have angered him by worshiping other gods, and he must have abandoned us in his anger to punish us for our betrayal. If we return to Judea and abolish the worship of all other gods, Jehovah will love us again and protect our homeland from invasion. As is already well known, the Jewish scriptures, which form the basis of Christianity, were written during this time when the priestly class and the ruling elite were in Babylon. Just a second, guys. Alright. Like the Christian New Testament, the Jewish Old Testament is presented as being literal fact, as opposed to mythological symbolism, as was the case with all previous religions up until that time. The main rallying point for the Old Testament is the literal interpretation of the story of Jehovah liberating the children of Israel from slavery in Egypt. Since this story has no objective basis in historical fact, where did this story come from? What was its purpose? The actual history of the creation of the monotheist state of Judea probably went something like this. The Jewish ruling elite and the priestly class had just returned from being held in bondage for 70 years in Babylon. Judea was most likely in a state of chaos. The ruling Jewish elite needed to strengthen their nation. They also needed something to explain their defeat at the hands of the Babylonians, which would help them restore their power over the remaining common folk who had been without their rule for 70 years. The elite needed a religious and political tool to unite the people under them while restoring military and political power to protect them internally and externally. In short, the defeated Jews needed a new mythology to unite them. To satisfy these goals, the ruling elite brought with them an extremely powerful tool, a political tool combined with a religious tool. It needed to be a strategic tool that would effectively crush any opponents by casting them as traitors and cowards. A modern political equivalent would be the Republican tactic of calling into question the patriotic loyalty of anyone in the USA who opposed the Iraq War by equating them as someone who didn't support the troops. A tool that created a fervid nationalistic sentiment designed to dissuade anyone from any pesky critical thinking. The returning Jewish elite brought with them a new, completely unique religion, which focused solely on the worship of the protector god, Jehovah, to the exclusion of all other gods. This new religion not only solved their immediate problems concerning reuniting the Jewish people, but it also cast the Israelites as unique among all other people in the world. These downtrodden, defeated victims of imperial oppressors became the sole inheritors of the one true religion that worshiped the one true God that every other nation in the world had abandoned. They came home with the intent to erase their polytheist religious heritage, which failed to protect them from conquest. They came home with a new religious system, which we now call monotheism. It was a new religion based on fear, a new religion designed to eradicate instability by controlling everything and everyone. By introducing a mythology where Jehovah is the savior of the Jewish people, the message was very clear. If you want to avoid being defeated and taken off into slavery again, you must worship Jehovah alone. Anyone who worships the old gods is a traitor to the security of Judea. The greatest balm for one feeling the sting of ultimate inferiority is to recast oneself as ultimately superior to all others. This new Jewish religion served that purpose very well. In fact, it worked so well that the Roman Empire, hundreds of years later, would appropriate it for similar purposes. The equivalent of this kind of propaganda theme can be found in modern America, where the fundamentalist Christian right-wing conservatives try to rewire American history by proclaiming that the founding fathers were fundamentalist Christians who were seeking to create a purely Christian nation. In every presidential election, we hear the cries of the right-wing candidates who want to uphold the Christian values of the Founding Fathers. For anyone that has read any of the Founding Fathers in depth, the truth is far from this Christian mythology. The Founding Fathers wrote profusely on the dangers of fundamentalist Christianity and religion in general, but please enjoy trying to tell that to the average follower of Fox News. But once again, I digress. Let's see. Paranoia and in the Ten Commandments. If you have read the Ten Commandments, you will notice that there are really only eight different commandments, not 10. The first 3 commandments are solely concerned with the exclusive worship of Jehovah. When someone unnecessarily repeat themselves, it reveals an obsession. Why would Jehovah need to have 3 separate commandments regarding his exclusive worship? This is because the 10 Commandments were written at a time when the Jewish elite were introducing a new style of worship, while simultaneously seeking to eradicate an ancient, deeply entrenched traditional polytheist religion. That is no easy task. People do not easily discard their ancestral religion. Most only do so under the threat of death. The penalty for disobeying the commandments of Jehovah often included death. Death is the commanded punishment in the Old Testament for the sin of idolatry. The Jewish elite needed to strongly emphasize monotheism as the only accepted form of worship to a population that had, for thousands of years, been devout polytheists, as has been revealed in the archaeological record. The average person in Judea had altars in their home to multiple gods and goddesses. The worship of the protector god Jehovah was done only by priests in Jerusalem. This is because Jehovah was the god of the state of Judea, worshipped mainly by the ruling elite. In order to keep control of the population after the return of the exiled elite, the priestly class had to eradicate the practice of polytheist worship within the household by replacing the household worship of polytheist gods with the state-sanctioned worship of Jehovah. Private worship automatically became a political unification tool. To worship Jehovah was to worship the state of Judea. But worship of Jehovah in the home was thought to be far inferior to state-run worship of him in the temple. The Old Testament is very clear that in this regard, only the priests were allowed in the temple. Of the Holy of Holies, the Holy of Holies were if the priest made the slightest mistake in the ritual, he would instantly die at the hands of Jehovah. This is a far cry from the average person who only recently could boldly and independently approach the gods in their own home. There was no need for perfection in worship One only needed their devout intent. Polytheism was the religion of the masses. This was a threat to governmental control. By creating a state religion exclusive to Jehovah, the priestly class could then have more control over the population. To worship Jehovah was to worship the state of Judea. Jehovah was Judea. By creating a religion that shared no commonalities with their polytheist neighbors, the Hebrew elite reduced any risk of unwanted assimilation to their intended subjects to other cultures or nations. During the 70-year absence of the Jewish elite, it was very likely that the borders of Judea became very porous and insecure. There must have been a real threat of foreign influence, perhaps even the threat of that Judea would be swallowed up by their neighbors and cease to be a separate culture. One of the main themes of the Old Testament is Jehovah's anger over the betrayal of his people who worship the gods of their foreign neighbors. There was no distinction between freedom of religion and treason against the state. Polytheism, by its very nature, is an inclusive religious philosophy, and it is also a religious worldview that is empowering to the individual. In order to reduce the threat of personal liberty and foreign assimilation, polytheism had to be eradicated. If the returning Jewish elite were seeking to rein in their scattering population, it served them to disempower the individual and make him subservient to the nation. The most basic right of any people is the right to think for themselves. By controlling people's religious beliefs, the powers that be can control the whole population. Why Egypt? So you may have already come to the same conclusion as myself in that the story of Moses leading the 12 tribes out of Egypt is nothing more than an allegory of the returning Jewish elite escaping captivity in Babylon. The story of subduing the pagan Canaanites is clearly an allegory of the intent of the Jewish elite seeking to eradicate their own ancient Canaanite religious heritage, which they feel failed them. This entire new religious history had to have been written during the 70 years that the Jews were being held captive in Babylon. In order to avoid causing problems with their captors, in their new mythology they replaced their actual captors, Babylonians, with the Egyptians. Moses wasn't leading the children of Abraham out of Egypt into the new promised land. The Jewish elite were hoping to be freed from Babylonian captivity in their return and return to their Canaanite homeland. Alright, so let me check on time. And I am good. Alright guys, well next time we will come back to this and return with Elohim versus Jehovah, the chapter on Elohim versus Jehovah, and we'll leave it there for now. So thank you guys for watching, and of course if you're interested in anything that I have to offer, I really don't get into my products and services on these videos because I'm just reading through a book and it's not really relevant to anyway. So if you want to check out any the things that I have to offer, any of my courses, products, services, anything that I have to offer, my books, go to gebotheshaman.com. You can also check out, there's a bunch of links in the description as well. So I'd highly recommend checking those out as well. So yeah, thanks guys for watching, and we will be, we'll be right back with the next series, the next episode in the series. So we'll talk to you next time. Peace. Take care.